we're going to be exploring ways I've worked on over the last 4 or 5 decades to make energy use several-fold more efficient. So at this extraordinary moment of transformation in our health, our polity, our relationships with each other, our economy, our security, our mobilization for the global climate emergency, we're going to bring you a unique approach to design in a spirit I call applied hope. So let me start with the big energy picture. Together, efficient use and renewable energy and electrification of heat and mobility are squeezing out fossil fuels, whose large fraction of global energy today is as misleading a guide to their future as was the number of horses in 1900. A flourishing business, but cars were just about to arrive. This course is going to equip you to squeeze out those fossil fuels even faster than shown by making the two upper wedges, the efficiency and renewables, even bigger, and the renewable wedge, therefore, even faster and more effective. The tipping point is neither in past history nor in future mystery. It is right now. The world's total use of fossil fuels roughly peaked about 5 years ago and began bumping along a plateau with minor excursions due to weather or war. But right around now, carbon-free power is starting to meet all demand growth and then more, tipping fossil fuels into steepening decline. So the light gray and dark gray scenarios at the far right, existing trends and net zero scenarios, are from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, BNEF for short, but they've been similarly framed by the International Energy Agency, IEA, by BP, Shell, McKinsey, Rystad. They imply that right around this year, 2025, the trend of the previous 2 centuries will start to reverse. So the burning of fossil fuels, having about stopped growing, will begin to fall ever faster. It's really exciting to be here at that time. So this course is about a largely overlooked way to make that fall happen a lot quicker, more beneficially, led by business for profit, by saving several times more energy far more cheaply than was previously thought possible. This is not so much through new technology as through new ways of thinking about design. Now, when rapid shifts in the global energy system are mentioned, you may first think of the unprecedented speed of the revolution in energy supply. That is indeed extraordinary and wonderful. We'll learn about it some more, but the efficiency revolution is even more extraordinary and wonderful. And much current energy policy misses both these transformations. Here's what's happening on the electric supply side, an overview of the past decade's global renewable revolution. So the bars show the size and composition of global capacity generations for generating electricity. The black line shows the fraction of new capacity coming from solar plus wind. It's currently in the upper 90s%. The red line, using the right-hand scale, shows how China is adding nearly 2/3 of the world's renewable capacity. The 2024 numbers, last column, are going to change a little bit as the final data come in. They just started coming in the last couple of weeks. In 2025, renewables are officially forecasted to provide 93% of new U.S. and 95% of new global generating capacity, and the same till at least 2027. So the revolution happened already. A lot of people missed it. Now, if you add in orange the major growth stacked up at the top here in renewable heat from solar and geothermal and modern biomass, and in dark blue, a little wedge in there, the modest growth in bioethanol and biodiesel, you find the growth in renewable electricity most obviously in solar and wind power, is far from the whole renewable energy story. There's a lot more renewable heat and mobility still to come. But why did most official forecasters fail to foresee all this stuff? Well, two reasons stand out. First of all, energy incumbents and official forecasters tend to think linearly. So our government's forecasting model misses the story of coal's decline in blue. It simply resets the starting point year by year on a linear extrapolation that's structurally wrong. It's unrelated to the actual behavior. For solar power in yellow, electric vehicles in blue, batteries in red, and a lot more, linear forecasts, like in this case IEAs, keep being spectacularly overtaken by events in the marketplace. But that is not only because of their linear thinking. There's a second major blind spot too. The traditional forecasting emphasizes fuels, which dominate supply. But those fuel commodities are being displaced by energy technologies. Technologies are cheaper than commodities. They can evolve and deploy at a speed that you need a log scale like this to draw. And cheaper renewable technologies have done a kind of meteorite strike that's transformed the whole competitive landscape. This graph stops 5 years ago, but since then it's just continued more and more like that. Now, manufactured technologies are not just cheaper, but also faster than fuel commodities. Just compare the slopes at which different generating technologies grew their output, starting when they first reached 100 terawatt hours a year of output. So solar and wind growing much faster than the fossil fuels, and indeed faster than the fastest growth in the history of nuclear energy. And that was a major government priority. Now, as investors figure this out, that the technologies are faster and cheaper than the commodities they replace, the investments in renewable supply and in efficient use are soaring, and renewable capacity additions are rising even faster because their costs are meanwhile falling a lot. So last year, solar investments exceeded investments in all other electric generating technologies combined. They exceeded all investments in the oil business combined. And indeed, those investments in displacing fuel with technologies are already so large that in 2023, they accounted for about 6% of the total GDP in the United States, 21% in China, 30% in Europe, 4% in India. And that doesn't count their indirect stimulus effect from making energy service cheaper and more stably priced. So the new energy reality is not linear, it's exponential. Here's the global growth since 2010 in generation by wind in green, solar in yellow, the sales of electric vehicles in red, battery storage sales in blue. Now, this new normal needs an agile mindset because it's hard to catch an exponential curve from behind. Many traditional models are now dangerously misleading. Using just year-old data can be hazardous to your financial health. The United States shares in this rapid growth, but it dominates old energy industries, not new ones. America is not the technological epicenter of clean energy as it was for the internet. For now, the clean energy epicenter is China, where far-sighted policies have built about half the world's renewable energy and even more of many of its supply chains. The U.S. is starting to catch up, but from far behind and with unstable policy prospects. China, Europe, and others resolutely pursue consistent long-term strategies and will gladly grab any market where the U.S. falters. So it'll still happen, but others will do it. Last year and this year, solar capacity alone is surpassing every other global source of electricity. Battery storage is surpassing pumped hydro storage capacity. the traditional method of bulk storage. And this runaway growth is driven by an important positive feedback loop. As columnist Tom Friedman says, the more renewables we buy, the cheaper they get, so we buy more so they get cheaper. A year ago, wind, solar, and batteries could beat new fossil-fueled generation in 85% of the global economy in the gray range. And at least 3/4 of the world economy, wind, solar, and batteries would be just the cost of operating old fossil-fueled power plants. That's down in the aqua range down here. So as BNEF found, the cheapest way to meet a flat load is solar or wind power plus backup. And backup can be any combination of fueled or generally cheaper, demand side or storage or renewables. So almost everyone who is still building fossil or nuclear power plants is not paying attention and is going to learn a costly lesson. Now, to be sure, different parts of the same country or region may vary widely in their speed of uptake. RMI did a granular analysis of over 110 territories in the United States and Europe and China, and most of them nicely fit an S-curve, and their aggregated fit is even closer. About a fifth of the territories are leaders, a fifth are laggards, and 3/5 are chasing the leaders up the S-curves. But despite all that scatter between different places, all three regions are on track for about half solar plus wind generation by 2035, just 10 years from now. The manufacturing and the mining capacity to produce these technologies is already built or being built. China alone can now make twice the solar modules that are being installed, and that locks in rock bottom prices for at least the rest of this decade. Those prices have fallen threefold in 2 years. In Sweden, Chinese solar modules are now the cheapest material for sheathing your house or for building your garden fence, even if they produce no electricity. China has also been electrifying 9-fold faster than the rest of the world, and the price of its lithium iron phosphate battery cells just fell by half in 6 months. All of this is opening new global markets to grow into China's preemptively overbuilt capacity, and that makes it hard for other countries to break in. The only question about cost is whether its fall is going to be fast or faster. As Michael Liebreich said, making a gigawatt, 1 billion watts, of solar power capacity took 6 years, 18 years ago, 6 months, 12 years ago, 1 week, 6 years ago, 1 day, actually just 15 hours by the end of last year. There's nothing remotely like this in the whole history of energy. New rules. So the three big parts of the energy transition are that renewables will push out fossil-fueled electricity. Obedient electrons will displace fiery molecules, and efficiency will shrink waste. All at once, and all basically because those are the winners. They cost less. But this should come as no surprise because we've seen this movie many times before. We've seen it in steel, ships, road vehicles, lighting, power, and heat, among many others. We'll return a bit to this history later, but it matches the giant flip that is now so disruptively arriving in the global energy system. You see, switching from fossil fuels to renewables is not going to be slow, costly, and hard, the standard incumbent story on the left, but rather fast, cheap, and market-driven on the right. Renewables, electrification, and more efficient end use are transforming the energy system faster than they are shifting forecasters' mindsets. That's the rate-limiting step in the whole process. Now, perhaps most forecasters are still supply-centric and haven't yet realized that, like renewable power, efficient use is not a static resource stuck forever in the past. It's a highly dynamic resource, like renewables, primed for very rapid change, and that's what this course is about. Specifically, we'll learn how an overlooked opportunity called integrative design can make the efficiency resource several-fold bigger, yet cheaper. But let me first split energy efficiency into two big pieces. Most obviously, today's mainly fossil-fueled energy system wastes 2/3 of what you feed in the front end, the so-called primary energy you start with, due to losses in extraction, conversion, and delivery. But those losses can be dramatically reversed. Displacing fossil fuels with primary renewable electricity brings a free bonus of 2 or 3-fold savings in this upstream part of the energy system, because you're replacing steam power plants with solar and wind power that don't throw away 2/3 of the energy at the power plant. You're replacing internal combustion engines with much more efficient electric motors. You're replacing furnaces and boilers with heat pumps. Those kinds of substitutions can save about $5 trillion a year. That's nearly 5% of gross world product. And here's how that can work. Professor Thomas Kohlberger in Sweden has kindly shared these sketches with us of how efficient supply augments efficient end use. Let's start with the left-hand column here. On the upper left, thermal power plants' huge conversion losses in red are eliminated at the lower left when renewable sources in green make electricity directly from a solar cell or a wind turbine without having to boil water to turn the turbine and generator. In the middle column, the fuel combustion at the top to make heat is several-fold less efficient than a heat pump at the bottom that uses renewable electricity to collect and concentrate low-temperature heat that's already free all around us. And then in mobility in the right-hand column, gasoline and diesel engines with their big losses in red are a lot less efficient than renewable electricity driving efficient electric motors in battery electric vehicles. So the systems across the bottom row, replacing fossil fuels with renewable electricity, are several-fold more efficient in turning fuel or captured natural energy flows into final energy. But these several-fold savings are just in supplying electricity, heat, or traction. They come before we raise the efficiency of the equipment being powered, or the building being heated, or the vehicle being moved. That part is called end-use efficiency, and it's often neglected. So now let's complete a more detailed version of the previous diagram by adding that bit on the right. And then you see that the 2 or 3-fold savings between primary energy and useful energy can be multiplied next by even bigger savings from end-use efficiency. And that wrings more end-use energy services like hot showers and cold beer and baked bread and smelted alumina and comfort and mobility from each unit of final energy delivered to the customer, like electricity or gasoline. It also makes heat pumps and EV batteries smaller, cheaper, less mineral intensive. It makes renewable supplies smaller, cheaper, faster in displacing fossil fuels. So this downstream energy efficiency resource can be very dynamic. It's several-fold larger than officially assumed. And the upstream and downstream savings multiply. Most experts think that over the next third of a century or so, the world's end-use energy efficiency, down at the right end, can be about doubled at a profit. But integrative design raises that potential from 2-fold to about 5-fold. That's the most revolutionary opportunity in the whole energy space, and it's even more profitable than the 2-fold savings were. And yet it is not in any official forecast or climate model. Of course, if I told you up front that the world's primary energy efficiency overall can be improved by about 10 or 15-fold, roughly 3-fold upstream times 5-fold downstream, nobody would believe it. It would sound crazy. That's why I broke it into 2 pieces. You can see actually it's more reasonable. But it does fit decades of observation, and you'll learn how to do its largely overlooked downstream part. Sector by sector, application by application, we'll discover together how to capture this overlooked practical potential for radical energy efficiency. Now, economics evolved from analyzing limited resources like land or minerals. So most economists and business leaders grew up in the widespread mindset of diminishing returns. The more you buy, the more scarcity raises costs. This mindset is increasingly contradicted by modern industries with increasing returns, often due to technology with network effects like telecoms or with dramatic economies of mass production. And now energy efficiency too has become such a contradiction. So the evidence in your reading, How Big is the Energy Efficiency Resource, shows that unlike familiar geological sources like oil reservoirs or deposits of copper ore, most new energy efficiency reserves can cost less than what we're exploiting right now. And that's because the new savings can come not from adding more or fancier widgets, but from using fewer and simpler widgets, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. And therefore, rather than suffering diminishing returns, we'll often be able to achieve increasing returns. So the more energy you save, the less it costs. In this course, we're going to learn practical, profitable, proven ways to increase the typical efficiency of buildings today by about 4 to at least 10-fold, of automobiles by about 4 to 8-fold, heavy trucks about 3 to 6-fold, airplanes by 3 to 8-fold, old factories by about 2 or 3-fold, new ones by up to about 10-fold, using cement and steel by about 2 to 4-fold, data centers upwards of 10-fold, in short, by about a factor 5 for the whole global economy, all by systematically practicing the art and method of integrative design. Now, this method remains rare. It is not yet what our academic programs describe, or most experts deliver, or our economy's incentives reward. And as far as we know, this is the only course offered anywhere that systematically provides the overview and builds the skills that you need to become an integrative designer. So we're really excited that we get to take this journey together with you. But how can we save several-fold more energy at lower cost than is widely thought possible? Is it magic? No, it really starts with your state of mind. One of my mentors, the inventor Edwin Land, said, "Don't undertake a project unless it is manifestly important and nearly impossible." Good rule. He said, "Marketing is what you do when your product is no good." He said, "A mistake is an event the full benefit of which has not yet been turned to your advantage." He said, "Any problem can be solved as long as it is correctly stated." He said, "Every creative act is a sudden cessation of stupidity." And he said, "People who seem to have had a new idea have often just stopped having an old idea." And of course, that's the hard part. Your other courses cram you full of stuff. We will too, but different stuff. But more important is what we will encourage you to unlearn. So you can learn new things, we're going to ask you to forget some old things. We will invite you, as Asian traditions urge, to seek beginner's mind, original mind, child mind, and open yourself to new ideas by letting go of all assumptions and preconceptions. That may be the most transformational learning you can do in your entire lifetime education. Of course, we all used to be good at it when we were kids. The phrase child mind is literal. Children are good at it. And I just learned that the idea behind Edwin Land's company, Polaroid, came from his 3-year-old. Around 1945, Land had just taken a photograph of her. And she asked, "Can I see it now?" Instead of replying, "No, sorry, sweetie, I need to get the film developed and printed before I can show you the picture," he thought to himself, why not? And by 1991, that 3-year-old's question and his openness to it had spawned a $3 billion company, the innovation leading Apple of its day. One day, probably in China around the 8th or 9th century, a master now named Nanin in Japanese was visited by a university professor who asked to be taught Chan, the forerunner of what we now call Zen. The professor said he wanted to be taught, but he kept talking about how much he already knew. And Nanin smiled and politely poured a cup of tea, and he kept on pouring and kept on pouring until the tea overflowed and spilled over the table and onto the robes of the visitor, who became agitated and cried, "Stop, don't you see? It's full, no more will go in." So Nanin stopped pouring and said, "Like the cup, you are too full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" As Tao Te Ching says, 27, a good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving. A good artist lets her intuition lead her wherever it wants. A good scientist has freed himself of concepts and keeps his mind open to what is. So it's the same for a good designer of an artifact or of an area of thought and practice. Keep beginner's mind and you will gain skill in practicing applied hope and creating abundance by design. So let's explore how beginner's mind let me reframe the whole energy problem in the mid-70s, when it was easy to be ignorant about energy strategy because there was no place you could go study it. Efficient design, really any design, starts with why, with intent, with purpose, with what end-use service you're trying to deliver. But it was not always so. Until I reframed it in this article in 1976, the energy problem was differently conceived and defined. It was focused not on end use, but only on supply. The question had been, how can we provide more energy supply, more of any kind, at any scale, at ever higher quality, at any price, from any source? Many economists then said energy use must already be perfectly efficient. Americans and presumably all others live in a notionally perfect market economy that does not permit waste. There's no accounting for what some people said. So this paper in 76, claiming the opposite, sparked a furious year-long debate. And there's a 10-centimeter thick fine print congressional hearing record recording 36 tedious responses sets to fatuous critiques. President Jimmy Carter, an excellent engineer, took a strong interest in it. He framed a lot of his energy policy around it. And in 2014, when he was 90, he reminded me how valuable he'd found it. But why was this thesis so intensely controversial? Well, here's the backstory. Around 1975, 2 years after the Arab oil embargo broke on the world like a thunderclap, almost all energy experts, government officials, business leaders still insisted that energy use and GDP and well-being must spiral ever upwards in this frenetic embrace. Literature on what energy efficiency could do was just starting to emerge, but the supply industries didn't accept it. The assumed economic growth, therefore, implied energy supply growth that was looking ever less feasible and less attractive. It was too costly, too difficult, too slow, too nasty, but nobody had framed an alternative vision coherently. And heretically, my unformed beginner's mind thought about energy backwards and inside out. Generally a good way to start. So instead of starting with supply, I started to the other end with demand. And then that 1976 Foreign Affairs article stood energy policy on its head by asking a new question. What's the job? What's the right tool for the job? The official forecast, you see, all extrapolated historic growth and built to meet it. And we were told that anything else would mean going back to caves and candles. They really said that. But my soft energy path would deliver the same real growth of an ever grosser national product by combining efficient conversion and end use with right quality, right sized, renewable, benign, resilient, widely accessible supplies, which I called soft technologies. That quest continues. There's a 40-year retrospective where you can read how it's going, and I look forward next year, I hope, to writing the 50-year retrospective. So I was shifting the question from seeking more supply to meet supposedly homogeneous extrapolated total demand to seeking just the right amount and quality and scale and source of energy for each end-use tasks. Again, hot showers and cold beer. Well, I was living in England at the time, so maybe it's cold showers and warm beer. But in hindsight, this was a classic paradigm shift in the sense that Thomas Kuhn described in a 1962 book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. You heard the phrase paradigm shift? It's asking a completely different question. Yeah. Well, starting with a different question annoyed and frightened the energy incumbents because I was able to infiltrate and run around inside the perimeter of their belief space, harvesting their data and showing by their own methods that their approach wouldn't work, but a different one could. Now, if there had been places in 1976 to study energy policy or strategy, I might not have been able to imagine the right question, because I might already have learned too much about how things are supposed to be done. But being young, naive, scrappy, tenacious, very lucky, I was able to trigger a realignment of energy cosmology, and not knowing that was impossible made it possible. So I've been busy ever since elaborating and helping implement the details. And an outfit called RMI, then called Rocky Mountain Institute, I started in '82 with a handful of colleagues, was assembled to help. It's now close to 800 people in 62 countries. But notice that this new energy paradigm was not just a new answer, it was a new question. It was as startling as if I'd asked, technology is the answer. But what was the question? In a sense, that's what I did ask. And throughout this course, and then for the rest of your life, I hope to improve your skills in asking the right question, because, of course, the answer you get depends on the question you ask. Asking a different question is the second most powerful intellectual tool you have. It's enabled by the most powerful tool, cultivating beginner's mind, so you could ask that different question, the one so wildly novel and simple and obvious that nobody asked it before. You know, answers are easy, but questions are hard. Not the reverse, as we often assume. Once you get the problem properly stated, as Edwin Land said, the solution becomes self-evident. And you know it's the right question when nobody can understand why people were puzzled for so long, wondering in the bewilderness about something that now seems so obvious. In 1962, the artist Pablo Picasso was asked about what we now call computers. He had a marvelous reply. He said, "Computers? But they're useless. They only give you answers. What's the use of a better or quicker answer to the wrong question? It's the new question that best reveals opportunities." So please focus on clearing your mind of old questions so you can ask new questions. Then your hard work to get the questions right makes it pretty easy to find new answers. Now, in this spirit, to rearrange your mental furniture a little and help us all get reminded, let's start with a little mental calisthenic I learned from the late, great Paul McCready, greatest aerodynamicist of the 20th century at Caltech. Textbooks on creative thinking have for decades presented this 9 dots problem, and it's normally framed as find the solution that will connect all 9 dots with just 4 lines without lifting your pen from the paper. Looks like you need 5 lines. How do you do it with 4? Well, you think outside the box, which is the origin of that phrase. And then one day, Paul said, the professor came into the class a bit irked because one of his students had just said she'd figured out how to solve this problem in 3 lines. Wow, 4 lines was hard enough. How do you do 3? Dots are infinitely small. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, these dots are pretty plump. And maybe we don't have to go through right through the center of each dot. Okay. So if your paper is wide enough, you can always do the Z trick. Okay. Well, seeing this, the students started to feel rather liberated. And you know what happens then? They started to solve this problem in 1 line. There are many one-line solutions. Let me get you started with a few. Our Japanese friends might suggest the origami solution, where you just fold up the paper until all the points come together in a line. If you're a geographer, you might want to use a really long line. Let's see, there were some mechanical engineers here. tool-using critters. So you know that you can pick up a tool called a scissors. There wasn't a rule against cutting out the dots. Or if you're a statistician, you could crumple up the paper, and if you stab it over and over again enough times with a pencil, eventually you will go through all 9 dots at the same instant. The one I like best came from a 9-year-old girl who said, "You didn't say it had to be a thin line, so I drew a really thick line." So this tyranny of the word "the," find the solution with just 4 lines, put us back in the box and kept us from being creative in finding more elegantly frugal solutions. As a prelude to how we can seek the right statement of the design problem, this lecture introduces what energy efficiency has done and can do when taken to what some might think an extreme. I would call it no longer inadequate. After all, when somebody asked Edward Land about his famously hard work, he said, "Anything worth doing is worth doing to excess." And he added that we live in a world changing so rapidly that what we mean frequently by common sense is doing the thing that would have been right last year. Well, last year's efficiency is already outdated. Many of the efficiency opportunities I described in the first version of this course 14 iterations ago look tame today, and that's going to keep happening. In Ray Anderson's metaphor, as we climb Mount Innovation, our upward path may be foggy, but we know which direction is up. And the view from the top, the prize is beyond measure. Radical resource efficiency could replace penury with sufficiency, envy with contentment, conflict with comedy, trade-off with synergy, cost with profits. So let us make no little plans and hold no small ambitions. Nearly all the energy people now use is wasted. And we're here to learn how to turn this vast waste into benefit, profit, and fun. A little history. The past 49 years, saved energy, about 2/3 due to smarter technologies, has dropped U.S. energy use by 65% with immense cumulative savings. Renewables, meanwhile, nearly tripled, but with 27 times less cumulative impact. Who knew? Renewables get practically all the headlines because they're visible. You can see them on the skyline, on the rooftop. But energy is invisible, and the energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. And yet saved energy is half of the world's historic decarbonization. It's at least half of future decarbonization. So when we emit it, we're missing half the design space. We're making the clean supply problem look at least twice as hard as it should be. Another bit of history. Around 1975, U.S. government industry all said that the total input energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never go down. A year later, in that foreign affairs paper, I heretically suggested it could drop 72% in the next 50 years. Well, so far, as you just saw, it's dropped 65% in the first 49 years. And yet, just the innovations already added by 2010 can save another threefold, twice what I originally thought, at 1/3 the real cost. And today that's looking conservative, because optimizing buildings, vehicles, and factories as whole systems, not as piles of little isolated parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. So by now you're probably wondering what sorts of ideas and practices animate this integrative design that can help accelerate climate and a lot of other solutions. Well, there are a web of interrelated elements that for now we can organize into 10 pillars or principles on which your design exercises, your puzzler solutions will build. By the way, do you know where this image of pillars is from? La Sagrada Familia, good for you. Yes, it's the breathtakingly beautiful cathedral in Barcelona by the Catalan architectural genius Antoni Gaudí. It's like a giant stone forest. Now, do you happen to know how he did the structural design of those soaring stone arches and vaults and pillars long before we had computers? Well, you can go down to the basement and see an upside down physical scale model with strings or fine chains suspended from posts so they would hang down in catenary curves, equally distributing their gravity-induced tension along each chain. Then he photographed those curves, traced them on paper, turned the drawings right side up again, and built the stonework to that pattern so the compressional loads in the stone would also be evenly distributed. Wow, that's beginner's mind. So what are these 10 pillars of integrative design? Well, the first one, the starting point, is to cultivate beginner's mind. It's never too early or too late to start. It's the hardest and most essential step, and this course is going to make you a lot better at it. A second starting point is to transcend disciplines. Blow up silos, or as we call them in academia, cylinders of excellence. If you can't destroy them, span them, or simply ignore them. Knowledge has no boundaries. Those lines on the map are just artifacts of academic tribalism. Deep topical knowledge is vital, but you can't understand the world and navigate it safely just through a microscope. You also need a wide-angle lens to see where you're going and what's coming at you. Without vision across boundaries, the people perish. Those two starting points let you get to work by focusing first on the purpose, starting with intent, with the effect you want to achieve. Think why before you think how. If you start with the end use, the service you want to deliver, then you will naturally learn to put efficient use before greater supply, passive methods before active, and simple means before complex. Fourth, having started at the end with the desired end use, work backwards or upstream from there. So when you start your savings at the downstream end of a chain of compounding losses, and as in this power and pumping system, you reverse those compounding losses into compounding savings going back upstream. That saves a lot more energy at the front or upstream end, and it also often makes all the components in between smaller, simpler, and cheaper. So in this pumping system diagram, energy is flowing from left to right, from fuel at the power plant to flow out the pipe, but efficient design should flow from right to left. The fifth pillar comes from, among others, General, later President Eisenhower, who said, if a problem can't be solved, enlarge it. Don't chop it into smaller bite-sized pieces, but move the boundaries out to include more options, more synergies, more degrees of freedom until it encompasses what the solution requires. You'll learn by doing that this simple idea is astonishingly powerful. Sixth, optimize buildings, factories, equipment, vehicles, anything you design as a whole system for multiple benefits, not as a pile of isolated parts for single benefits. So here's the middle of my house, the banana farm, this atrium where we've so far harvested 83 passive solar banana crops and about 100 kinds of tropical fruit with no furnace in a subarctic climate at slightly lower construction cost. This white arch at the top has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. Seventh, simplify. Take stuff out. Take more stuff out. Aim to do almost everything with almost nothing. Somebody asked Michelangelo, how did you sculpt David? He reportedly replied, oh, it's simple. I just chiseled away everything that wasn't David. Well, as you'll learn, sculpture's subtractive technique runs counter to a deep-seated human bias for adding rather than subtracting. So when you try to chisel away thoughts rather than stone or wood, it does get harder, but you'll learn how. Pillar 8 is the first of 3 suggested methods or tools. It guides you to follow 3 rules with data. The first is measure, don't guess. Rules of thumb might help in designing thumbs if that hadn't been done already, but it's a pretty poor way to design anything else. Without measurement, you can't know the right size or how much is enough. My mentor, Liang Lok in Singapore, says if jumbo jets were designed the way most people design cooling systems in big buildings, those airplanes would have an extra set of engines and a spare set of landing gear just in case, and they'd be really safe because they never get off the ground. The proverbial drinking glass is neither half empty nor half full. It's simply twice as big as it needs to be. Second, it's not enough just to use measured data if they're old and lack trajectory or a sense of where they're heading and why. As the hockey great Wayne Gretzky said, you need to skate where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. Third, keep your data and your understanding fresh by making your systems smart, with continuous measurement, feedback, learning, and improvement. Always updating your parameters, architectures, decision logics, because systems without feedback are stupid by definition. Here's a diagram of Colonel John Boyd's OODA loop, which tells you to observe, orient, decide, act. In other words, see what's happening, consider what to do about it, choose, act, and repeat. That's at the core of military tactics, because if your loop is faster than your opponent's loop, you win. So you try to make your loop faster and your opponent's loop slower. The same is true in business competition, and it's vital to our efforts to outrun the crises we've created. Pillar 9. Understand the minimum energy theoretically required to do your task. Figure out why normal design, even best design, use more than that, and then systematically trim the difference, reduce the waste. Along the way, you may even find that doing a different and easier task instead can better fulfill the ultimate purpose you defined in Pillar 3. Like maybe instead of improving the lighting system, open the curtains. Then once you've pared to essentials, don't add back padding on the supply side. Designed to tolerate rare conditions, often by smarter means than enlarging supply, but optimized for the conditions that occur most of the time. And 10th, learn from many teachers, especially from nature's 3.8 billion years of design experience, like this car modeled on a boxfish, or Japan's 500 series Shinkansen bullet train. It cut air resistance 30%, energy use 13 to 15%, by reshaping its nose like that of a kingfisher. You can see at the far right diving from air into water, which is 800 times denser, with no concussion and scarcely a splash, thanks to a specially evolved shape on its beak. Also, adding small shapes to the main part of the pantograph, the arm that captures electricity off the overhead wires, turned its one big air vortex into many little ones, like the way an owl's primary feathers do for silent flight so the mouse can't hear it coming. All this happened because the senior train engineer I happened to meet, Nakatsu Eiji-san, happened to be a bird watcher. More later on such biomimicry. Meanwhile, please check out an amazing and gorgeous free online journal called Zygote, Zygote Quarterly. You will be astounded. Now, Pillar 10 offers nature as the supreme example of how whole systems work. So to reinforce that idea, let me tell you a story. In the early 1950s in Borneo, many of the Dayak people had malaria. The World Health Organization had a solution: sprayed EDT everywhere. So they did. The mosquitoes died, the malaria declined. So far, so good. But there were side effects. The roofs of the houses started to fall down on people's heads because it turned out the DDT had also killed tiny parasitic wasps which had previously controlled the thatch-eating caterpillars, which propagated and munched up the roof thatching. So the colonial government addressed this problem by giving people sheet metal roofs, But then the noise of the tropical rain on the tin roofs kept people awake, and they were starting to go nuts. Meanwhile, the DDT poisoned bugs were eaten by geckos, which were eaten by cats. The DDT built up in the food chain and killed the cats. Without the cats, the rats flourished and multiplied, and soon the World Health Organization was threatened with potential outbreaks of typhus and sylvatic plague, which it would itself have created. So it had to call in the Royal Air Force from Singapore to conduct Operation Cat Drop, parachuting, by one account, 14,000 live cats into Borneo. Yes, this actually happened. I have a thick folder of scientific papers on it. And when a colleague of mine who speaks about 15 Indonesian languages was recently talking to elders in the Kelabit Highlands, he asked them about it. They said, oh yes, one day cats fell from the sky. This story is our guiding parable at RMI. It shows if you don't understand how things are connected, often the cause of problems is solutions. Most of today's problems are like that. We tried to do just one thing, and it did a lot of other things we didn't think about and didn't like. But if we can harness hidden connections so the cause of solutions is solutions, then we can solve, or better still, avoid not just one problem, but many without making new ones before someone has to go parachuting more cats. And then a second little parable for you from our former student and TA, Ann Singer. He kindly sent me a beautiful decade-old supplementary story, a 4.5-minute nature video, which I think deserves the over 45 million views it's had.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. The numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately, those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion, the channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
I love this story especially because my home valley in western Colorado has about 1,200 elk, a few hundred people. By the way, that was about elk, not deer. It has also innumerable deer, a couple of dozen mountain lions, scores of bears, and many other wild neighbors. But in the past month, finally, we have just regained a family of 6 wolves to keep everything in balance. And maybe we'll see some trophic cascade there too. So perhaps these two nature stories can help us learn integrative design from its supreme master. When we get really good at design, we might dream of approaching nature's effective and effortless and awe-inspiring harmony. Just notice that wolf spelled backwards is flow. So to sum up, you're going to be using these 10 pillars to build your skill in integrative design. These are not facts you'll forget. They're good new habits that are going to rewire your brain and make you lastingly more original and more effective. They will serve you well in whatever you do for the rest of your life, and I'm really excited to see what you will do with them. By the way, students less alert than yourselves might have failed to observe that we have slightly changed the previous sequence of these pillars. There's a lot of supporting material posting online next week at the new Extreme Energy Efficiency Learning Hub. One last thought. Remember our 5th pillar to make tough problems soluble by expanding their boundaries? Well, the 4 energy-using sectors, buildings, transport, industry, and electricity, are all connected. These 4 energy-using sectors can save more energy faster together than separately. For example, it's a lot easier to solve the car and electricity problems together than separately. And then all 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, not only public policy, but also new business strategy, new business models, can combine to change the game while the old industries are still lacing up their boots. So in energy, as Aristotle said, of all things, the whole is far more than the sum of the parts. And our improvements in design and technology don't even include yet the many important opportunities to use energy more fairly and more mindfully to achieve what European scholars call sufficiency. So to solve the energy problem, we just need to enlarge it and integrate it. The results may at first seem incredible, but they're real, and you can join those who are making them happen. Thank you.